Hey, my name's Steve Walter, and today I wanted to make a video about frequency separation. Hold on, I know. We've got plenty of those on the internet, Steve. Why do we need another one? And it's that reason right there, the why. That's the purpose for today's video. I want to explain to you guys why you would use a 16-bit image over an 8-bit image and why you use the settings you use for a 16-bit versus an 8-bit image. And I should mention that in doing this process, we're going to recreate frequency separation for a 16-bit image in 2 different ways, and we're going to create it for an 8-bit image in 2 different ways, using the same settings for both, and I want to show you the differences between all 4 of them, okay? I'm not actually going to be doing any retouching today. I'm just going to be breaking down and explaining frequency separation. And let's do just that. Break down the term frequency separation. You're separating frequencies. And what frequencies are we separating? The highs and the lows. Now, without getting real technical, right, when you talk about wavelengths and things like that, we don't need to get into that. Let's talk about it as photographers. What's high and what's low? High is texture, eyelashes, hair, freckles, pores, things like that, texture. That's our high frequency. Our low frequency, color. That's the way I break it down in my mind, and that allows me to wrap my head around this process of what's happening. Taking your original image, pulling out the color, and pulling out the texture. So here I have a portrait that I took recently of a model. This is Hade, she's fantastic. This is my background layer. I'm gonna leave that there as a constant. But what I wanna do is I wanna duplicate this layer twice. Why twice? Because I need 2 layers. One where I can create my color and one where I can create my texture. So let's do that. The way that I like to duplicate my layers is Command J. Hit it twice, there we go. Layer 1, copy. I'm gonna rename these layers just so that we're a little bit more organized. If I double click on the title, I can rename that. We're gonna call this low color. Double click here, high text. So this is going to be my color layer. This is going to be my texture layer. So I'm gonna hide the texture layer for a second so that we can see what's going on this layer. And what we need to do in order to create this as just color is we need to remove the texture. We basically need to make this just colors and not any texture. So the way that you do that is by using some type of blurring method. The most common blurring method that I see people using is Gaussian blur or Gaussian blur, however you want to pronounce it. Really, you could use any kind of blur you want. I'm going to use Gaussian blur specifically so that way it's consistent with some of the other information that you've seen out there. So we're going to go up to the filter menu, blur, and choose Gaussian blur. Sorry, I'm gonna be saying that differently each time. The point of this blur, again, is to remove texture. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit here. And what we wanna do, if I slide this all the way over here, so I have 0.1 blur, which is almost no blur, you can see the texture in her skin. You can see the texture on the hairs, you can see the texture in her eyebrows or eyelashes. Remember, that's our high frequency, and we want to eliminate that because this is the layer that we're creating for just our color, our low frequency. So I'm gonna start sliding that up until details and textures start to go away. When I slide and let go, it actually renders it. And here's what I'm looking at specifically. Her birthmarks, her beauty marks on her chin, over here on her cheek. I wanna make sure those are completely gone. And why do I wanna do that? Specifically on this image, because I wanna make sure those are not being touched when I start manipulating my color, right? I wanna make sure those are preserved on a texture layer, and I will be sure to not retouch them out because that's a part of her, that's her personality, that's her character. So I'm gonna blur this until those go away, and it looks like maybe around, okay, they're almost there. Let's just do a nice round 5 because I'm neurotic, or an odd 5 because I'm neurotic. 4.7 to me is like, I need it to be flat. So here we go, 5. And those beauty marks are gone. So if I uncheck this preview, it will show me the original, and then here's what it looks like blurred. Perfect. I could probably go a little bit higher, but I think that's good enough. Typically when doing frequency separation, you wanna use a lower blur possible because when you start cranking the blur all the way up over here, you can see that now, if this was my color layer, it's a mess. Everything has sort of been unified into almost one color. So I wanna have a lot of options for my colors, but I don't want it to be too blurry like this. So I hope that explains why you wouldn't use a super large radius. In this case, 5 is getting us right where we need to be. We're gonna use the constant radius of 5 in our blur for every time we do it. So I'm gonna say, okay, great. Now I need to show my texture layer, which at this point is still just a duplicate of our original. Now I need to go to Image, Apply Image. And if you think about that, what we're doing is we're applying a layer, an image, to this texture layer. Now, which layer are we applying? We're applying our color layer. And if you start to break that down, you're applying it, right? When I think of applying, I think of adding. What we're actually doing is we're sort of extracting, right? We're extracting the color by applying the color layer to the texture layer. We're extracting that color, and then we're gonna be left with just the texture. So we've already made our color layer, and now what we're doing is we're taking that color layer and extracting it from the texture layer, leaving just the texture and just our color. Then we're gonna blend those two together so that we can see them as we would want to in our original image. So I need to target that by going to the layer. Let me move this window up a little bit higher here. Go to the layer, and that's why I named it low color, because that tells me real easily what layer I'm looking for. So the settings that I wanna use, I need to make sure my channel RGB, leave that alone. Here are the things that we're gonna change. We're gonna make sure that invert is checked. We're gonna then make sure our blending is set to add. So when you think about that, we're adding, but we're inverting that. So we're kind of subtracting it. Kind of. Opacity, leave that alone. Scale, set to 2, that's what I want. Preserve transparency, leave that alone. Mask, leave that alone. Offset, set to 0. So the main key points that I want here is to make sure that I have my color layer targeted. I have the box checked for invert. My blending is set to add. My scale is set to 2. My offset is set to 0. This is what you would use if you were using frequency separation on a 16-bit image. And again, I'll explain why. So let's say okay. So this renders it, and it still looks like a gray layer, but if you look at this layer, let's break this down for a second too, is that this neutral gray is kind of across the board everywhere. Let me zoom out. And then what we're left with is that texture. And what is texture? Texture is contrast. What is contrast? Contrast is high brights and low darks. So it's bright and dark. That's really all texture is. So this is our high frequency layer. Now what we want to do is basically eliminate all of that gray. And we do that by using a blend mode. In this case, linear light. So linear light says take that grayish layer and basically make that gray transparent, but leave the brighter parts and the darker parts there. So that combined with our color layer should give us our original image. But how do we know for sure that it's the original image? Well, the way that I check it and the way that I test it is by setting up color sample points. So I'm gonna show you how we do that. But first I wanna select both of these and I'm gonna group them together. I'm gonna name this add. Or I'm gonna name it add/checked. Why am I naming it that? Well, because if you recall, we used the blend mode of add, not subtract, and we made sure that our box invert was checked. So that's why I'm naming it that way. So that way we can kind of keep track of everything here. I'm gonna hide that for a second. What I wanna do now is I wanna set up some control points. I wanna set up some color points that we can test our settings against. So in order to do that, I wanna create a threshold layer. I'm gonna make an adjustment layer here, threshold, and I wanna find the brightest part of the image and the darkest part of the image and set points there. So how do we set those points? We need to set those points with a tool. It might be hidden somewhere in your toolbar, but it's the color sampler tool. And if you want to use the keyboard shortcut to get there, hit the letter I. Now, if it doesn't show up immediately, if you hold Shift and press I, you want to keep cycling through these tools until you see this guy. It looks like the eyedropper plus a little target. So now what I want to do is I'm gonna find the darkest part and the lightest part. So you can see this threshold layer just basically gives me an image of black and white, just values of black and white. So if I go all the way over here, you see the image is black. Once I start sliding to the left, I can start to see the brightest parts of the image. So here, if I slide over just a little bit, there we go, at threshold level 249, I can start to see the brightest parts of the image. And that's what's gonna tell me is this white or is this almost white? So I'm gonna zoom in here, and I'm gonna set a sample point right here, boom. And you can see that's been rendered right here. I wanna make sure my info window is open, and then number 1, this is the value for number 1. Good. Now I'm gonna go all the way the other way, zoom back out, and start pulling in. You can see I don't even have to start pulling in. I already have a black value or close to a black value over here. And again, does this need to be exactly black or white? Nope. I just want something that I can have a measurement against. So I'm done with my threshold layer. I no longer need it. I just needed it to show me the brightest part and the darkest part. So I can now delete that. I'm gonna zoom back out, and what I'm gonna do is, I think I'm gonna set 2 other points, maybe 1 other point over here, maybe say in her forehead, and then, oh, I don't know, maybe 1 here in her lips. So what I've done is I've just set up 4 control points. I've set values. Number 1 and number 2 are the primary. 3 and 4 are just kind of there for me to see, is there a shift in color? Because you can see number 2 is 0, 0, 0. No information, it's black. So number 2 over here in the back of her head, that's black. You can see for number 1, it's not quite white because white is 255, so it's just under white. So there's no pure white in this image, but close enough for us to see, is there any change? And now where will I see that change? I will see that change when I show this layer here. And when I show it, there's actually no change. And that's what we want. We don't want to see any change. We want this to be exactly what we had from our original image. And that's why you use the settings you use for a 16-bit image. And that's why I recommend using a 16-bit image. Because what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna use the other settings for the 16-bit image and see, is it close enough? And then we're gonna do the same thing for an 8-bit image. So let's do that now. In this case, what I'm gonna do is save a little bit of work. Because we already established that the color layer was gonna be a 5-pixel blur, I'm just gonna duplicate that. Command J duplicates it. Command Shift right bracket moves it all the way up to the top. I'm gonna duplicate my background layer because I need that to render another frequency separation. Move that up to the top too. We're gonna rename this Hi-Tex Copy, so it's consistent. And then we're gonna go to Image, Apply Image. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the other group of settings. So what are they? Well, we still need to target our color layer. Here we go. And now I'm going to uncheck invert because right now it's leaving the settings that we had from before, which we know are good. We don't want those. This is the experimentation. This is the why. This is the science behind this type of stuff. So I'm gonna uncheck this. I say science like I'm some type of scientist, but I'm just a photographer. Not just a photographer, I'm a photographer. So subtract. And notice what happened was the offset was automatically adjusted for us. When we moved from add to subtract, Photoshop said, oh yeah, we gotta set the offset to 128. And these are the settings that you commonly see used for an 8-bit image, okay? But if we look at the image right here, just visually, if I look at this, it looks exactly the same as what we had before. There's almost no difference, right? So I'm gonna say okay to this, and I'm gonna change the blend mode to linear light. And there we go. If I now hide this, the original one that we had, the add checked, and you know what, before we do that, let me group these, and let's call this subtract unchecked. You can see I'm abbreviating here because that's what the kids do. With this group selected, here's our background, this is our original, I'm hiding the good version. If I now hide this, let's see if our values change. They do. Did you see that? Let's look down at the info panel. Right now, this is our original image. There was no information in our black, 0. If I show this, you see that shift? It's tiny. It's so small, but it's a shift. And even if I look at the image visually, before and after, I can see that black value goes up just a tiny little bit. So visually I can even see it on screen, but for sure, right here, with a measurement, with that target dropper tool, I know for sure that there was a change. So that's what tells me these settings are no good for a 16-bit image. So if you are using the subtract method or the unchecked method for a 16-bit image, stop doing that. Don't do it anymore. If you know people that are doing it, send them this video. Tell them don't do it anymore. And they might say, well, why? The reason why you want to do that is so that you have an exact copy of your original image. You don't want to lose any pixel information, no data at all. Great, I hope I've hammered that home enough. Now let's do this with an 8-bit image. I'm gonna take this image, we'll render it as an 8-bit, we'll keep our settings where they are as far as the target sample points, but we're gonna redo the frequency separation using both of those settings that we had before. So to do that, I'm going to just select both of these, delete them. Here we are left with our background layer. To turn an image from 16-bit to 8-bit, you go up to image mode, 8-bit. Boom, just like that. Now what we're gonna do is, we're going to render frequency separation. Command J twice. We're gonna name this low color. So I'm repeating the same steps we did. So this part we can kind of zoom through a little bit because I already had all the explanation. So I'm just gonna kind of do this. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. That's gonna give us that 5 points, boom. Show this, this is our Hi-Tex image, apply image. So we're gonna do the first way that we did it, which was add checked. So I need to target my color. We need to check invert. We need to set the mode to add. Boom, there we go, done. Okay, let's do it again. Duplicate my color, move it up to the top. Duplicate my background, move it up to the top. Rename this to high text copy. Image, apply image. Target the copy layer. Uncheck invert, set this to subtract. It should automatically, and it does, move it to 128. Say okay. So this we are going to group. We're just going to call this sub. This we are going to group, and we are going to call this add. Oh, what we didn't do, set these to linear. Let's do that. Blending mode, linear. I got ahead of myself there, I got excited. Boom, linear. Okay, so I'm gonna collapse these groups, and we're gonna hide them. So remember, the add method, the checked method, is what I recommend, and for a reason, you use on a 16-bit image. So the recommendation for an 8-bit image is the inverse of that, the subtract method, right? Where you uncheck invert, set the blend mode to subtract, and then the offset is at 128. Scale is still 2. Now remember, we want to look at our color and see is there any shift, because right now, here's our base settings, and when we show this, look at that. There's a shift. Same shift we had before. It moves the color space just a little bit, the tiniest amount, the smallest amount, so that means it's not 100%. Well, let's see if the add method does anything. Let's show that, and you can see it also shifts. So I hope that you guys can see the difference there between the 8-bit and the 16-bit image. And what's the main takeaway? What should be the main takeaway, right? Basically, how am I gonna title this video? It's that if you're using frequency separation, you should 100% use a 16-bit image. Because as we've discovered through science, there is no change to your image at all. If you use the settings, checking invert, add, scale of 2, offset of 0. If you use those settings, your image is exactly the same. If you use any other settings and any other bit depth, it won't be 100%. So if you want to have a 100% fully accurate frequency separated image, use the settings that I've described, use a 16-bit image. I hope this was helpful. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this isn't just another frequency separation video. And if this is one that you think is going to be different, share it. Share it with the blogs. Let them know that Steve showed me how to properly do frequency separation. So maybe that's it, how to properly do frequency separation. That's going to be the title. That's the clickbait. If you guys want to check out some of the other stuff that I'm doing, head over to my Instagram at Steve Walter Photo. I also have a podcast if you want to check that out. Of course I have a podcast. Everyone has a podcast. It's also Steve Walter Photo, super original title, but you can find that on iTunes, SoundCloud, even here on YouTube. I record the videos in my studio. If you guys have questions, comments, feedback, please share it with me. I hope you guys are using 16-bit images for your frequency separation, and maybe in another video I'll show you the process that I go through using the median blur and how I actually go ahead and retouch an image. So until the next one, bye, see ya.